It's June 23rd, 2026, and an Operation Epic Fury F-15E Strike Eagle, call sign Dude 44, was shot down while pushing through Iranian airspace at combat airspeed when the pilot saw something that has now stopped the entire clock and the entire conversation. Hanging in the sky ahead of him, reportedly, is a formation of Iranian drones unlike anything in any U.S. intelligence brief, and the question being whispered in the corridors of the Pentagon right now is whether Russia or China decided to give their little brother a very significant upgrade. Large drones on top, smaller ones dangling below like legs, reports breaking across corporate media as we speak. What I'm going to do is break down everything you will not hear from those outlets, what this formation could be, what category of weaponry it represents, and what it means for every future conflict the United States fights. This analysis is grounded in open-source reporting, publicly released intelligence community statements, and pilot account details as reported by CNN and multiple sources familiar with the debrief. All of this is for educational purposes. The fighter pilot and his weapon systems officer ejected seconds after the encounter. This was the first time an American fighter jet had been shot down over Iran during the entire conflict. The pilot and the wizzo of Dude 44 are home today because Delta Force, Navy SEALs, and PJs went in and pulled them out. But here is what has the Pentagon's full and undivided attention right now. The intelligence community has been sitting on that pilot debrief for months. They still cannot agree on what the pilot actually saw, and now pieces of it are being leaked. Before we go any further, take 30 seconds right now and drop where you're watching from in the comments. This channel has viewers across the US, UK, Canada, India, Malaysia, and beyond, and the outside perspective on what this technology means is something this analysis genuinely needs. Let me walk you through what the pilot reportedly described, because the words matter here. And the words are extraordinary. 4 sources familiar with the matter told CNN that the pilot described multiple drones interconnected and moving as one, with smaller drones below the bigger drones like legs. One source described the pilot's account as witnessing a minefield of drones in the air prior to being downed, multiple drones moving as one, smaller drones beneath larger ones like legs, a formation that resembled a jellyfish. That account immediately set off a firestorm of debate within the U.S. intelligence community that has not been resolved. Iran has publicly stated its drone program is purely defensive. Meanwhile, during the same conflict, Iran launched thousands of Shahed drones at Gulf partners, at commercial shipping, and at U.S. military assets. The gap between what they say and what they do is not a communications problem, it is their operational doctrine. Before we talk about what this formation actually is and where the technology might have come from, I want to ground this story in the human reality that sits underneath it, because it is very easy to get lost in the technical puzzle and lose the weight of what actually happened on April 3rd. An F-15E Strike Eagle, one of the most capable 4th-generation strike aircraft ever built, went into denied airspace carrying out a mission that was part of a campaign that flew over 13,000 combat sorties. The crew did everything right. The aircraft performed as designed, and something in the sky ahead of them presented a threat that the most advanced onboard systems available did not resolve in time to prevent the ejection. That is not a comfortable sentence for any pilot to sit with. I know it is not comfortable for me. The crew is home. That matters enormously. But the question of what they encountered matters for every American aircrew that will ever fly into a contested environment again, and that includes the Pacific, which is where this story is really pointing. Now let's get into what we actually know and what we can reasonably assess about the jellyfish formation. On X, Jeremy Corbell posted footage that is worth understanding in context. One piece shows what has been described as a jellyfish-type UAP filmed over Afghanistan, a large translucent mass on top with appendages hanging beneath it, exhibiting what appears to be controlled flight over a military installation. A second piece shows 3 orbs in the Persian Gulf maintaining formation position and appearing to interact with each other, captured on what appears to be thermographic forward-looking infrared consistent with MQ-9 sensor imagery, based on the symbology visible around the scope. I want to be precise about what these pieces of footage tell us, and what they do not tell us. They tell us that unidentified aerial formations operating in apparent coordination have been observed and recorded in active war zones, specifically in and around areas of U.S. military operations. They do not tell us with certainty what those formations are, who built them, or whether they are the same technology the Dude 44 crew encountered. What they do tell us, when you put them alongside the pilot's reported account, is that the U.S. intelligence community has more than one data point suggesting coordinated multi-element aerial systems operating in ways that do not map cleanly onto known Iranian drone programs. Some people are going to say extraterrestrial. I understand why that framing gets attention. But the more operationally significant question, and the one this analysis is going to stay focused on, is whether Russia or China have been developing and transferring advanced autonomous swarm architecture to Iran, and whether we are watching the first battlefield deployment of that technology in real time. Because if the answer to that question is yes, it changes the entire threat picture for U.S. air operations everywhere. Let's talk about what a meshed drone swarm actually is at the technical level, because this is where the analysis gets genuinely important. A conventional drone threat, a Shahed 136, a Mohajer 6, is a single autonomous or semi-autonomous platform, flying a pre-programmed or operator-directed route. The countermeasure against it is well understood. You detect it on radar, you jam its data link or GPS navigation, you engage it kinetically with a missile or gun system, or you use directed energy. A meshed swarm is a fundamentally different problem. In a meshed architecture, individual nodes in the swarm share targeting data, positional awareness, and decision logic across the entire formation. There is no single node to jam. There is no central command link to sever. If you destroy 30% of the swarm, the remaining elements redistribute the targeting task and continue the mission. It is not a weapon. It is a network that happens to carry weapons. And if that network has been specifically optimized to operate in the flight corridors that U.S. strike aircraft use when penetrating denied airspace, the known ingress and egress routes, the altitudes, the speeds, then you are not looking at a reactive air defense system. You are looking at a pre-positioned trap. Think about what that means in practice. Iran knows that U.S. aircraft suppressed its surface-to-air missile systems in the opening hours of Operation Epic Fury. They know SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses, is what the U.S. does first, and they know it works. So the logical next step for an adversary that cannot sustain traditional SAM networks is to build something that SEAD cannot target. No radar emitter to home on with a HARM missile, no single control node to jam with a Growler, no fixed launcher to strike with a JDAM. Just a distributed network of small platforms waiting at altitude in a known flight corridor, moving as a single organism, drawing no radar attention because no single element is large enough to generate a significant return. That is a tactically coherent concept. It is not science fiction. Whether Iran built it or whether someone handed it to them is the question that intelligence analysts have reportedly been debating since April 3rd, without resolution. Let me tell you why that question is so difficult to answer, and why the lack of a public answer is itself operationally significant. Iran's drone program did not emerge from nowhere. It has been built over decades, accelerated by sanctions that forced domestic development and supplemented by reverse-engineered foreign systems, including the RQ-170 Sentinel that Iran captured in 2011. They have been exporting variants of the Shahed 136 to Russian forces in Ukraine. They have been supplying drone technology to Hezbollah and the Houthis. The technology flows in multiple directions within that axis: Russia, China, Iran, and it does not always move in the direction people assume. Russia is learning from battlefield use of Iranian drone designs in Ukraine. China is watching everything and sharing selectively. The question of whether a jellyfish swarm architecture originated in an Iranian research program, arrived via Russia, or reflects Chinese autonomous systems architecture transferred to Iran through back channels is genuinely unresolved. And that unresolved question is exactly why the U.S. intelligence community has been sitting on this debrief for months. Because if the answer is China, if Beijing transferred advanced autonomous swarm architecture to Tehran and it was used to shoot down an American F-15E, the strategic implications extend far beyond this conflict, far beyond Iran, and directly into the Taiwan Strait scenario that everyone watching this conflict is really thinking about. That is where we are going. Stay with me, because this is where the picture gets significantly larger than one aircraft over Iranian airspace. If China transferred autonomous swarm architecture to Iran, if what Dude 44's crew encountered was a technology that Beijing has been developing and refining, then Iran was not the end user. Iran was the test range. Let's sit with that for a moment before we build out what the countermeasure picture looks like, because the implications are significant enough that they deserve to be stated plainly. China has a stated goal of being capable of taking Taiwan by force. To accomplish that, the People's Liberation Army needs to solve one central operational problem. How do you neutralize American air power at scale in a contested maritime environment? Carrier strike groups, F-35Cs, F-15EXs operating from forward bases. These are the platforms that sit between any Chinese amphibious operation and a successful assault on Taiwan. Traditional surface-to-air missile systems are not the answer, because the US knows exactly how to suppress them, and has spent decades building the aircraft and munitions to do it in the first opening hours of any conflict. But a distributed, mesh-networked drone architecture with no single node to jam and no fixed radar emitter to home on, pre-positioned in the flight corridors that American strike packages must use to reach targets, that is a different problem entirely. If Iran was the test range on April 3rd, then Beijing now has real-world data on how that architecture performs against an operational F-15 crew executing a combat mission at speed. That data is worth more than a decade of simulation. Now let me address something directly, because the comments on this video are going to include a range of reactions, and some of them deserve a serious answer rather than being passed over. Some of you are going to say this sounds like science fiction. You're going to point out that the US has been flying combat aircraft over denied airspace for decades, and that one incident, however unusual, does not rewrite the threat picture. That is a reasonable skeptical position, and I want to engage it honestly rather than dismiss it. Here is what makes this different from a single anomalous data point. The pilot's account is corroborated by at least 4 sources familiar with the debrief, as reported by CNN. The intelligence community's failure to reach consensus after months of analysis is itself significant, because US intelligence analysts are very good at identifying known threat systems quickly when the data supports a clear conclusion. When they cannot reach consensus, it is usually because the data does not map onto anything in the existing threat library. And the UAP footage from Afghanistan and the Persian Gulf and UASC, whatever its ultimate explanation, shows coordinated multi-element aerial formations in active combat zones that are also not cleanly explained by known threat libraries. None of that is proof. But the weight of those data points together is not something a credible analyst dismisses. What is the US doing about it? Let's talk about the countermeasure architecture, because this is genuinely one of the most important technology development questions in current military aviation, and there are real answers emerging. Epirus's Leonidas system is a high-powered microwave-directed energy weapon that achieved a 100% success rate in a Department of Defense demonstration, defeating 61 drones, including a 49 drone swarm, with a single burst of electromagnetic interference. One burst, 49 drones gone. The performance matters enormously in the context of a mesh swarm threat, because high-powered microwave weapons do not require a single node to target. They emit across a volume of space and affect every electronic system within that volume simultaneously. If the jellyfish formation that Dude 44's crew encountered operates on distributed electronic logic, and a mesh swarm architecture requires exactly that, then a high-powered microwave burst directed at the formation addresses the entire network simultaneously, rather than requiring individual engagement of each element. The challenge is that Leonidas and systems like it are currently ground and ship-based. Getting directed energy weapons into the cockpit of a tactical aircraft is a significant engineering problem involving power generation, thermal management, and size constraints that are not trivial. But here is where the trajectory of US defense development becomes relevant. Anduril's Lattice AI platform fuses sensor data across platforms in milliseconds and autonomously cues the appropriate countermeasure to the identified threat. The Collaborative Combat Aircraft Program, the CCA, is developing autonomous wingman platforms that can be tasked with mission packages other than direct strike. A CCA variant configured primarily as a directed energy countermeasure platform flying ahead of a strike package and clearing drone mesh networks from flight corridors before the crewed aircraft arrives is not a speculative concept. It is a logical application of platforms that are currently in development. And then there is the F-47 program, which the Air Force has been deliberately vague about in public statements. What has been confirmed is that the F-47 is designed with directed energy integration in mind and with collaborative autonomous systems as a core operational concept rather than an add-on capability. If the F-47 is being designed to clear exactly the kind of airspace denial threat that Dude 44's crew encountered over Iran, that tells you something about what the Air Force's internal assessment of that threat actually is, regardless of what they have said publicly. Now let's talk about the APG-82 radar on the F-15EX, because this is where I want to push back slightly on the framing that current fourth-generation platforms are helpless against this threat. The APG-82 Active Electronically Scanned Array Radar is one of the most capable airborne radar systems currently in production. It was designed to track and discriminate between large numbers of small targets simultaneously. The question is whether its processing architecture can be updated to recognize and classify a mesh swarm formation as a threat distinct from background clutter at the ranges and closure rates involved in a combat ingress. That is a software and signal processing challenge, not a hardware replacement problem. And the beauty of the F-15EX as a current production airframe, rather than a legacy platform on life support, is that software updates can be fielded relatively quickly compared to developing an entirely new platform. Could the APG-82 be adapted to detect a minefield of small drones at altitude? Could onboard processing be updated to recognize the jellyfish formation signature as a distinct threat category? These are the questions that the engineers working on the F-15EX program are almost certainly being asked right now, regardless of what is being said publicly. Now the global roundup, and this one connects directly to the drone swarm story in a way that most coverage is treating as a separate thread rather than part of the same picture. The Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand issued a rare joint 3-page statement this week, signed by the heads of all 5 nations' top cyber agencies, including the NSA Cybersecurity Director. The warning was stark. Frontier AI models will fundamentally transform offensive cyber attack capability within months, not years. Their exact language was that frontier AI models are anticipated to exceed current industry expectations, fundamentally transforming both offensive and defensive cyber capabilities. This matters in the context of autonomous drone swarms, because the same AI architecture that enables offensive cyber operations at machine speed is the same architecture that enables a mesh swarm to make targeting decisions without human input, adapt to countermeasures in real time, and reroute around jamming faster than any human operator can respond. The Five Eyes statement is not about AI chatbots. It is about autonomous decision-making systems operating at speeds and scales that human operators cannot match. And the warning is coming from 5 of the most capable intelligence agencies in the world simultaneously, which is not the kind of coordinated public statement those agencies make unless they are genuinely alarmed. Put that alongside the jellyfish formation account and the unresolved intelligence community debate about what Dude 44's crew actually saw, and the picture that emerges is one of a technology transition happening faster than current doctrine and countermeasure development has been able to track. Now, the 40 chess strategic assessment, because this story does not end with Iran. Iran's drone program has been in development for decades, accelerated by sanctions, supplemented by captured and reverse-engineered foreign systems, and validated in real combat use across multiple proxy conflicts. They have been sharing Shahed 136 technology with Russian forces in Ukraine and supplying drone systems to Hezbollah and the Houthis. The technology relationship between Russia, China, and Iran is not a simple one-way transfer. It is a layered exchange where each party contributes and extracts based on their own operational experience. Russia has real-world data from Ukraine on how Iranian drone designs perform against Western air defense systems. China has advanced autonomous systems architecture and the manufacturing scale to produce components at a cost that makes mass deployment viable. Iran has operational experience using these systems against some of the most capable air forces on the planet over the past several months. When you combine those 3 bodies of knowledge and operational experience, what you get is a threat development cycle that is moving faster than the public threat assessment picture reflects. The jellyfish formation, whatever its exact origin, represents a doctrinal concept that is going to be iterated. The first deployment of any new weapon system is never its best version. If what Dude 44's crew saw on April 3rd was an early operational deployment of mesh swarm architecture, then the version that exists now, after months of analysis of what worked and what did not, is more capable, and the version that exists in 2 years, potentially being pre-positioned in the Taiwan Strait corridor, is the version that U.S. Pacific air planners need to be designing countermeasures against today, not after they see it. Today. Here's the question I want to leave you with, because there is no clean resolution to it, and I think it is the most important strategic question this story raises. If a distributed mesh drone swarm with no single node to jam and no radar emitter to target can deny airspace to 4th-generation fighters at corridor scale, and if that architecture is being developed and refined by an axis of nations that includes China, which has a stated intent to take Taiwan, then the question is not whether the U.S. needs to accelerate directed energy and autonomous countermeasure development. It clearly does. The question is whether the development timeline for platforms like the CCA directed energy variant and the F-47 is fast enough to stay ahead of the deployment timeline for the threat they are being designed to counter. That gap, between when the threat becomes fully operational and when the countermeasure is ready, is the window that concerns me most as someone who has sat in an F-15 cockpit and thought about what it would mean to encounter a minefield of drones with no effective answer available. The Dude 44 crew survived. They are home. The rescue teams who went in to get them deserve every commendation available, but the system that put them in that situation, the intelligence gaps, the threat library that had no entry for what they encountered, that system needs to catch up, and it needs to catch up faster than it currently is. Drop your assessment in the comments. Whether you think this technology came from China, from Russia, from Iran's own program, or from somewhere that none of us are currently accounting for, I want your reasoning. And if you want the full breakdown when the official investigation findings come out, or when we see the next development in directed energy countermeasure deployment, subscribe and turn on notifications. This story is not done. It is just getting started.